Welcome again to another segment of the Movie Talk on KWDC 93.5. I am your host, Paul Besto, and today, as my guest, is.
Pavel Koshukov?
Yes, and Pavel's here for a special segment where we look at foreign films and classic films. And today, we're going to look at Russian film director Andrei Tarkovsky, and we've chosen two of his films out of his filmography, The Mirror and Stalker. And so we're going to talk about those two films. So, Pavel, we both watched this film, or his films, and have been inspired by them. And I was wondering, what we're going to start with The Mirror. What did you specifically like about this film?
Well, I mean, anybody who has seen the film, I think first thing you can say that's unique about it is the story structure.
Right, it's
the way it's
almost all over the place in a way.
Yeah, it has non-linear, and you don't see that often. Especially don't see that often, and that sounds weird, but you don't see that often in Soviet cinema. I mean, we always assume that Soviet cinema is close to the avant-garde when we look at directors like Eisenstein, Pudovkin, Dovzhenko, Vertov, the 20s films. But we must also understand that the 20s ended, and so did the experimentation in Soviet cinema. So Tarkovsky is one of the new unique directors of who came into being in the 60s, who wanted to challenge the norms. And these norms, they apply to Hollywood films, European films, but the standard for the classical filmmaking was even more strict, surprisingly, in the Soviet Union. And this is why Tarkovsky is such a unique filmmaker, because of films like The Mirror.
Right. Can you give us a little background of Andrei Tarkovsky? How did he start? What was it like?
Well, it's interesting. I really don't remember why he got into films. I know he watched a lot of films, but if you look at his biography, he, after finishing high school, he went and studied geology. He actually went to Siberia, studied geology there. Obviously, he didn't like the experience, so he changed his major from geology to Arabic, the Arabic language. And that sounds also kind of weird, but it got him closer to like the arts and closer to the intelligentsia, so to speak. Instead of being out somewhere, in the middle of Siberia, he got, he was able to go to Moscow and study Arabic there. And of course, we know that in Moscow, there's the State Institute of Cinematography, GEEK. And when he was over with Arabic, which he also ended up not liking that major, he applied to the film school, and there was like, lots of people applied, and then they could only like take 100. They only take like 100 every, like, not even a year, every like 5 years.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and he got he got taken in because he watched a lot of foreign films, all kinds of films, partly because his father, Arseny Tarkovsky, was not a famous poet, but he was a poet, and he had connections in Moscow, so he was like an artist, and he had special passes to see foreign films, and of course, Tarkovsky saw films by Fellini, Bergman, Kenji Mizoguchi, which he especially liked because of Mizoguchi's long takes. Well, that was a big influence. So, and of course, Tarkovsky, he, like many people, he wanted to follow in his father's footsteps. And but he was no good as a poet, surprisingly. He wasn't a good writer. So when he saw some of these poetic films, like by early Bergman, Fellini, Mizoguchi, Bresson, he thought, well, their films are kind of like, they're poetic, and he thought he could be a poet in the cinema.
Mm-hmm. And then that's what we see, that's the result in his films. They are a lot like poetry. His visual style is, how would you even describe his visual style? It's lingering shots,
Yes.
slow-moving camera movements, mostly of nature. And for me, when I was a young student, I first saw Solaris, and I remember seeing it with a friend, and he was like hating this film. He's like,
Mhm.
God, this is like Russian garbage. And I was like, it's so weird and interesting to the point where there's something about the style that I feel like is very special, and I enjoyed watching. And then I just started watching all of Andrei Tarkovsky's films. So the second film I watched after Solaris, I bought The Mirror on DVD
Mhm.
because then I saw it for pretty cheap. I bought that, and man, I've never seen a movie that had so many different color palettes as
Mhm.
in that movie. Um, so that was really interesting. So, what did you particularly like about The Mirror?
Well, besides the nonlinear story structure, and the fact that the film deals
Is it
with
like the
the dying
poetry?
man's memories. Yeah, the poetry. I mean, if you remember that throughout the film, there's poetry cited. And the poetry is not something
Right,
famous from the classics. It's actually the poetry of
of the
Andrei
director.
Tarkovsky's
Yeah.
father,
Oh, is it his father?
Arseny Tarkovsky.
Oh, okay.
And again, not a famous poet, but obviously perhaps underappreciated because the poetry is very good. Or especially, it might be good because it fits so well with the visuals. So in a way, you can see Tarkovsky trying to make the visuals go with his father's problematic poetry, and it works. But the film, yes, what I really liked about it is because it's very different from any films made during the time, Russian or from
Mm-hmm.
any other country, and that's why it's so unique. And again, talking about the political aspect, it's harder to make a film like that in the Soviet Union than it is even in the United States, surprisingly, because Hollywood's pretty strict. But yeah, in the United States or Europe, um, Europe, the Western world has at the time had much more freedom for experimentation, and which is why it's surprising that still in a more strict Soviet Union, a director could make such experimental films. And there's of course a handful of directors that experimented um, in the Soviet Union at the time, which is very surprising. And the most surprising thing about The Mirror actually is that it wasn't banned, because we always hear about Soviet films that were
Right.
banned. Like if you remember Alexander Askoldov's Commissar from 1967, that was banned. And that seems like a more straightforward film. It's strange. It's avant-garde for sure, but it's more standard. Deals with the Civil War, and when we have a film like The Mirror, which is way out there by any international standards, and it gets accepted. That's the weird thing, isn't it? Um,
It seemed like more of a personal film for Tarkovsky to make, and I think that's why it, drew a lot of attention. Because then a lot of Hollywood filmmakers, really liked him, and even Ingmar Bergman, another foreign film
mhm.
director, he was took an interest in it.
He said, "Yeah, Tarkovsky is the most important filmmaker of our
Yeah,
time." That's his
yeah,
direct quote.
and he's
Yes,
only made like 6 films, right? In his
he
whole
made 7
career?
feature films
7 features.
in
Okay,
his and he died when he was 54 years
right.
old. He wasn't that, which is not that long of a life. Yeah, and he made 7 feature films, which is interesting because he predicted that he'll make 7 feature films. It's something he said in passing at a party, and they turned out to be true. 7
What? I
feature
didn't know
films.
that.
Yeah, it's
That's
true.
crazy.
I think there was like this gathering of filmmakers, somewhere in Moscow, and he said, "I have a feeling I'm gonna live long. Maybe I'll make 7 feature films in my lifetime. I hope I can at least do that." He said something along those lines, and the weird thing, it turned out to be true.
Oh wow.
Yes.
Well, a lot of his visuals have really stood out to me as a young student filmmaker. I've not tried to uh, reimagine his shots, but if I'm stuck on an idea or I want to show a specific image, I kind of go back to Tarkovsky and then I kind of think like, what would this director do and how would he do it? And then from that, I would kind of tell myself, how would I do this shot and make it my own style? And ever since, I've kind of really stuck with Tarkovsky as one of my favorite Russian film directors, and I haven't seen that many Russian film directors
Hmm.
yet. But his style is definitely one of my favorites for sure. What else could I ask about this film? The colors is also very intriguing. There's scenes in black and white. There's
Sepia
sepia,
color.
yeah, like
Yes.
a blue, like a cobalt color,
Hmm.
and even that I've never seen different colors in film like that. I usually see one movie and it's the same color palette or around there, same color the whole movie. But this one really changes when it's going into the past or jumping into the future or the present. And I thought that was a really interesting way to tell the story because the movie is more poetic in visuals, and then the poetry kind of
Mm-hmm.
accompaniments it in many
Mm-hmm.
ways. So that's great. All right, so we're gonna take a break, and when we come back, we're gonna continue discussing Andrei Tarkovsky's The Mirror. So stay tuned. And we are back on the movie talk. This is KWDC 93.5. I'm your host, Paul Besto, and here as a guest is
Pavel Koshukov.
Pavel's kind of the foreign film guru here, so I thought I'd bring him on the show to discuss various foreign films because that's what our segment's about. All right, so we were just discussing director Andrei Tarkovsky. We were talking a little bit about The Mirror, and now we know kind of the history of Tarkovsky. Let's talk about our favorite scenes or some of our favorite shots.
Mm-hmm.
So, actually, I'm going to ask you what it was your favorite scene first.
Well, there's a lot. It's hard to answer, but if I had to, it'll probably be the scene with his mother floating above the bed.
I was going to say that one.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah,
It's just I don't understand why. I guess
it looks like a dream, like something out of a dream.
That's what Tarkovsky said himself. Yeah, I mean, there's not supposed to be any logic. It's just beautiful. The woman's floating over the bed, and
it's hypnotizing.
Yeah, it's great, and you can see like the wires holding her suspended.
Right.
It's just it's like movie magic, as you call it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think how they did that scene, because I was thinking about it, because I was like, how did they do it? Because her hair she's like levitating above a bed, and she's laying down, but her hair is still like floating.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, they had like a wire that they
was
put
it a
her
wire
hair on. Yeah.
The only thing I could have thought of was
wire.
She laid on like a block of green screen, and they just
there was no green screen. You can tell. I mean, you have to always remember Soviet films.
There's no green screen because the camera.
Budget.
It's like a camera zoom, I think. So the camera's not
I think
static.
there's camera movement. So yeah, but you can tell it's very sharp quality. And of course, it was green screen. Soviet films can afford sharp quality
That's
with
true.
combination effects.
Yeah.
You have to remember that the film only had a 600,000 ruble budget, which, if you make it into dollars, not that much. And that's where, again, some of the elements come into play, like the black and white sepia sequences, because he had only this amount of color stock, this much black and white, so it was almost like an encouragement to mix it around, because otherwise the budget would be higher. And if you even remember, Tarkovsky is famous for his widescreen films like Andrei Rublev and Solaris. But if you remember his last two Soviet films, The Mirror and Stalker, those have like the square format, the TV format.
4x3, yeah.
Yes, because it's cheaper. It's because of that.
I didn't know that.
It's not so much aesthetic as much you get what you get. And he got that film stock, and that's what he had to go with, which was hard for him because he loved the widescreen.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because even then, he made the film that it works so well that widescreen or not, it still looks great. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, true. I didn't even know that. That's kind of crazy that you're saying he had to film in a different aspect ratio.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if he had to take out a lot of his ideas to get things across. I don't know, because there's a lot of stock footage also in The Mirror of the war. Can you kind of give us a backstory about that? What are we kind of seeing there?
Well, the war footage, that speaks for itself. There is one shot though that's very interesting that has documentary footage of this strange, huge balloon.
Right,
about
I remember
to take
that.
off.
Yeah,
that's actual footage from the late 1920s, and that's what you call stratosphere balloon, where the balloon goes through the stratosphere.
Yeah.
With people on it. It was invented in France in the early 20s, and the Soviet Union also wanted to make a flight like that. The problem, there's this tragic music obviously playing during this scene, and that's because the balloon, I think it was 1929, 1928, after it made the world record of climbing very high in the stratosphere, it made the record, then started to descend, and somehow it started to descend too quickly, and the basket got ripped off from the balloon, and all the people died on it.
Oh, wow.
Why is it there? I mean, because I suppose the character, whoever he is, the mysterious narrator, who's dying and remembering. That's kind of part of his,
His
his
memory.
historical background. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
something that happened when he was younger, and it was.
It's a great human achievement.
Yeah, it's human achievement and a tragedy at the same time. That's kind of forgotten. Again, there's also the political aspect that the expedition ended in disaster, so everybody kind of quickly forgot about it in the Soviet Union, because propaganda reasons. Because this was during Stalin. Afterwards, I guess you could talk about it, but nobody still did. So of course, Tarkovsky is being a little bit, pushing the envelope, by reminding people of this incident at the same time, So I think it's just the aspect, of people dying and people forgetting about the achievement of these people. And Tarkovsky is kind of reminding his audience what happened in the country a while ago. Because if you remember, the scene's a little awkward. It just happens.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more like, I think it serves more as a reminder, more so than like to create a background of the characters, of the history of this country. I think.
So can you tell us what we should have probably done this before, but we're gonna do it now. Can you tell us kind of a synopsis or a brief summary of what the movie is about?
Oh, geez, it's kind of hard to say.
It is hard because it's very all over the place, but it's basically a guy remembering.
His
life,
past memories,
his memories
on his deathbed.
On his deathbed,
and of course, what most people remember, and Tarkovsky uses this is memories of childhood, especially of his mother.
Yeah,
to a very strange extent, because obviously all the scenes that we see, most of the scenes we see, are scenes that have the character in them physically when he was younger, or that he could have observed from afar. Right. But there's this one scene, where she's running through the rain to her work, the mother, to the printing press.
Right.
That she's afraid she made a mistake about an article that deals with Stalin, which,
right.
Big deal. He couldn't have observed that. And that's interesting. That's what confused lots of people. I guess, and Tarkovsky never explained it, so I guess if you think about it logically, it's just something maybe his mother told him and how he imagined it. But the film is interesting because there's a lot of interest. There's lots of films that deal with the same, and they were made later, that deal with the same problem of, a man's his deathbed, or he's already dead, and he's seen visions,
or he's dying,
experiences that turn out to be experiences from his past. Of course, all these films are linear, and even before we learn the twist, it's kind of obvious. And lately, I was helping out on a film that actually dealt with the same subject. And it was funny for me. It's not that the film was bad. I thought everyone did a good job, and the screenplay was interesting. But the thing is, the film's linear, and what Tarkovsky has, he has this very, unlinear film, for poetic reasons, but also because of a dream. I mean, if you think about it, and I think Tarkovsky said this too. If you have a dream, it's very strange. There's no logic, but there is logic. Right. And your experiences, affect that. In a way, I think what confuses people is because in the beginning, I mean, even in the end, the character hasn't died. He's dying, and we never learn that he's finally dies.
Right. Yeah.
But I think we can tell that the film is more everything we see. I mean, there are memories, and of course, if you think about things, you think about them non-chronologically. But also, there's the whole idea of when you die and you see things and it's all, kind of mixed up. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's other films that do it, like the more extreme film by Gaspar Noé, Enter the Void, kind of has a little bit of the same element, to an extent. Because it seems to be true, I mean, if we die, we have these, nonstop, kind of brain hallucination where we, remember everything very quickly from the past that somehow, made a big impression on us. And it could be something small. I mean, it's something you can't understand. That's the problem. That's why we have a scene like in black and white where we see, the country house.
Well, that was a dream. Well, with the mother floating and everything. That was his.
Yeah, the mother floating, but also like, the black and white scene outside of the country house where there's like a table, then there's bread and everything on it, and then there's the wind and it all flies out. Right. And then this chicken flies into the window and it breaks, and then the boy quickly wakes up. I mean, these things make no sense, but it's supposed to emphasize the strange personal qualities of everybody's perception of memory and what matters to them. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, everyone has like these strange memories that you really remember, even if they're true or not, that they just stick in their mind for some reason. And and for Tarkovsky, yeah, like for example, the scene with the bread flying off the table and the chicken flying into the window, it's one of those scenes. So, I mean, in a way, actually, if you think about it, the film could be really easily criticized because there is no logic, there's no point, and at the same time, there is.
Something, yeah. I think there's a great point. There's a lot of political statements, and there's
No, there isn't actually. And that's why the film, I think, was released.
okay.
It wasn't banned, like I said. Like, if Commissar had a more stronger political statement against war in general, which made it unfortunate because it took place, the film describes the Civil War. Of course, the Soviet Union fought in the Civil War after the collapse of the Russian Empire. But with the Mirror, it's very personal, and that's why, there were
Right.
problems with the film in the beginning. Goskino, the ministry, they didn't want to release it. But that's because it was too weird. But then they thought, well, there's nothing political in the film. And that's kind of true. There is nothing political in the film, so they released it. They released it limitedly. So for the whole Soviet Union, they only made 72 copies.
Well, I thought like all the footage, the black and white footage, was a lot of political things happening.
Well, maybe the balloon scene, but
Yeah,
not.
that's what I was thinking
Probably
about.
not. I mean, yeah, there's also scenes from the
I
Spanish
guess
Civil
there's
War.
no statement that he doesn't take a side in the political statement though. So I'm
Well,
wrong.
he never did.
Yeah,
'Cause
I'm wrong
he's
about that for sure.
a non-political, and it's interesting because we think of Tarkovsky as a new wave director from the '60s. That has political elements in him, like Jean-Luc Godard or Nagisa Oshima. But Tarkovsky is completely non-political. I think that's why you can say that the Soviet Union never had a new wave, because the '60s new wave we all associated with the avant-garde
Yeah.
and political statements.
Yeah.
And of course, in the Soviet Union, there were none. There was the avant-garde, but you couldn't make political statements. I mean, some films did it, like Commissar, but then it was banned at the same time. And the films that weren't banned, they were just non-political, or just artistic experimentations. Yes.
Huh. Interesting. Well, you kind of said my favorite scene, but I'll kind of say my favorite shots in a way, I guess. Some of my favorite shots are one in particular that comes to mind is there's like wind blowing and there's these plants kind of blowing in the wind,
Mm-hmm.
and he stays on that shot for a pretty long time, and it's like in slow motion a
Mm-hmm.
little bit.
Yes.
And I really liked how simple and poetic that was, and it was very dreamlike. And then I read that they used like a helicopter to make a gust of wind
Mm-hmm. Yes.
to do that effect, and I thought that was kind of cool because it seemed like a wind that you would never experience. And this is the whole film is
Well,
like
that's
this.
a hurricane,
There's
yeah. Mm-hmm.
this film is there's things that you see that probably wouldn't happen, and it happens in like a greater degree in this film, and it makes it look really cool. And if I were gonna say if any dream or if any film was close to dreams, I would say The Mirror is pretty close. And then I would
Yes.
kind of say Russian Art by Alexander Sakharov.
Sakharov, yeah, but Sakharov,
I feel like that's
his
kind of like a
favorite
dream,
director
right?
is Tarkovsky, obviously. So
Right. But
he
definitely
is inspired.
it is very dreamlike. And as a filmmaker, for me, both of us are filmmakers.
Mhm.
We always try to think of ideas that are kind of dreamlike qualities
Mhm.
that we could think of on our own. And a lot of filmmakers like Tarkovsky and Bergman and a lot of other directors use dreams that they've had to put into their stories. And I think this one is like in its truest form.
Yes, definitely, and that's why it's so famous to this day. Because I think it's the only true film that is like this screenplay that just is out of the director's emotional.
Do they have the screenplay?
personal.
They ever release that?
I don't know, but the
read
screenplay
it.
was changed a lot, and the
I'm
funny
sure
thing,
it was. Yeah.
The funny thing, there was names changed. Like it was at one point, The Mirror was called Bright Bright Day. Screenplay was called Bright Bright Day for some reason.
That is
then the
weird.
Confession, and Confession kind of is more
Okay.
fitting, but of
I
course
could see
Confession couldn't work in the atheist Soviet Union.
Oh. Huh.
But yeah, it's interesting. Tarkovsky, because he wrote the screenplay in 1964. After he finished the screenplay of Andrei Rublev, and he was already starting to film that film. And in a few time, he kind of wrote down a bunch of notes, and he kind of combined them together into the screenplay. And he always wanted to make it. That was going to be his next film, but of course his next film was Solaris. And Andrei Rublev came out in '66, Solaris '72. That's why the big gap. He was going to make The Mirror, and he couldn't, and he had to make another film. He wanted to make another film too. And he always, because you had to submit the screenplay, and it had to be accepted or not, be made. After all, it's not a capitalist society. There's no producers. The government says, "You want to make your film or not?" And they said, "No, no, no." The funny thing though is Tarkovsky every time he made a pretty plain screenplay. I think it was even in chronological order and everything.
Okay.
And every time he would resubmit it, he'll make it more strange. It's like instead of like he's kind of like was hurting himself. But he kind of thought, but he was already planning to make Solaris. He kind of thought he'll never make The Mirror. But then the head of the Goskino ministry, the film ministry, he was fired. He retired, and they got a new guy. He was younger, and I guess he was more liberal because he accepted the screenplay. He's like, and he read the most extreme version of the screenplay, already titled The Mirror, the one with not chronological order and everything. And he thought, well, I guess because he was new, he was just looking for not anti-communist films or religious films, like to cross off the list of films not to make. So when he saw The Mirror, he thought, it's just, a director's personal, experiences. You can make that for a little money. Like, yeah, go ahead, make it. We don't care,
What about the title of the movie? What does The Mirror really mean, you think?
Well, I mean, there's lots of reflections, and the mirror aspects of the film that
like
we
reflections
see
of ourselves.
that were never in the screenplay. Tarkovsky never intended them. When he titled The Mirror from After Confession, he kind of was forced to use the mirrors. And for Tarkovsky, he's a funny guy, because like he says, I don't know what it is. It is what it is. He's one of those type of filmmakers.
I can tell you.
And he says for him, aesthetic is most important. And of course, the aesthetic of The Mirror is it's very nice, especially it's hard to shoot, so the camera doesn't reflect in there, and well, of course, it's reflection of the past, because there's a scene where we see the young mother and she's walking through the halls. We don't see her, but then we see the mirror and she comes up, but it doesn't hurt. It's not her that comes up. It comes up an old woman.
Right, I remember.
And
the
funny thing is, the mother is played by the young mother. She's played by Margarita Tereshova, the actress, famous Soviet and Russian actress. But when she's the old woman, that's actually Tarkovsky's own mother playing.
What?
Her older self, yeah.
I did not know that.
Mother. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, even the poetry that's read, that's Arseny Tarkovsky's poetry, the Tarkovsky's father. But he also reads it. That's another interesting thing.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh.
And the narrator, not the poetry aspects, but the narration aspects, they're narrated by a famous actor who never appears in the film, Innokenty Smoktunovsky, played Hamlet in 1964, and Grigory Koznetsov's Soviet Hamlet, which is very, very good. And he narrates, he's like the superstar, and he like narrates, he's the one who does the talking, and we never see him. That's like another interesting aspect of the film, for example.
I think I agree with your analysis. The mirror is kind of a reflection on ourselves, and in Tarkovsky's case, it's a personal connection of what he's experienced in life and the memories and dreams that he's had,
Yes.
And I think it just brings it all in one film. This is his most personal, one of his most personal films.
Yes, it's most personal, and it's very funny. It's not funny. It's very interesting that he got to make it in the tough system of the Soviet Union instead of when he moved to Italy and then Sweden, France, where he had all the freedom. And it's very interesting that under these constraints, he made his most personal work. Like he said, he never talked, afterwards, obviously, because, it's...
Oh, you don't think so?
No, it's not so much to him, of course, to him. He said, this is it, I can retire after that. He didn't, but, obviously after a film like that, you did what you wanted, your most... It's his, it's his emotions, his philosophy, it's his psychology.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to have to watch the movie again. I own it, and I've only seen it like 3 times, and I always forget little things, and like what you're describing. Like now you're telling me like the father kind of does the narration of the poetry.
Yes.
Now I'm interested just to see, just knowing that, I kind of want to just...
Yeah, there's lots of things you don't know, because obviously it's not in the credits.
Right.
But, afterwards we kind of know, after time passes, how much interesting elements he applied in his film, including personal, like his father and mother playing part in the film.
That's right. All right. Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about another Andrei Tarkovsky film, Stalker. So please stay tuned. And we are back. Thank you for listening to KWDC 93.5. This is the Movie Talk, and today we're going to discuss foreign films and classic films, but specifically today, spending time on Russian film director Andrei Tarkovsky. We've chosen two films from his filmography to discuss, which is The Mirror and Stalker. And we just talked about The Mirror, and we're going to move on to discuss Stalker. I am your host, Paul Besto, and here with me is
Pavel Koshukov.
He's the Russian enthusiast guru who is actually Russian.
Yeah.
So it kind of helps for our review and analysis of foreign films about Russia. Okay, so now we're on to Stalker. So this is the film after The Mirror, and it's an adaptation. And can you tell us a little bit about the plot summary? What's the story about?
Well, I mean, it's post-apocalyptic. We have the society, and there's this disaster, like a meteor fell, big ruins, and of course, where the meteor fell, there's a place called the Zone because it's strange. Some say it's radioactive or other things, but it's just mysterious, and that's why it's blocked off by a large gate. And but for some reason, lots of people want to go in there, and these people are called stalkers. And they go there to retrieve artifacts or, give tours to people who are interested in going, which is what the film is about. It's about, the stalker, taking two people, a scientist and a writer, taken to the Zone. Of course, in the Zone, there's apparently some place, and apparently it's like an abandoned house, that for some reason is thought to be special, that it can make your dreams come true. Problem is, of course, nobody made it there, but it's the legend, and of course, people want to see if it's true or not. Then the characters that Stalker takes, they want to go to the Zone exactly to go into this room. That's pretty much the basic story. But of course, with a basic story like that, that's where you can have lots of elements for bring up in the film, in the book, and especially in the film, about human psychology, philosophy. Because after all, we have a scientist and we have a artist, and of course, an artist wants to be the artist. He's the writer. He wants to go to the room and wish for better artistic qualities, whereas the scientist wants to go in a room and wish for world peace or something. Because he's a scientist, so he's humanitarian. What's basically the basic story.
Okay.
That brings about a lot of issues.
So what's I remember about this movie, saw it a while back. I actually owned the film. I should just watch this one again too. I like in the first half of the movie, it's in sepia tone, and then in the second half, I think it's mostly in color, right?
Yes, it is. Right? Yes.
Yeah. So why do you think the director chose that aesthetic?
Well, that's basic stylistics. I mean, besides the budgetary constraints that we just mentioned in The Mirror, the post-apocalyptic town where they live, it's not colorful, it's in black and white, it's lifeless. And the Zone is strange and mysterious, and that's why it's full of life and mystery, and that's why it's shot in color.
Right, and what I like about Tarkovsky too is he did this in Solaris, where if someone is being transported from one area to the other, he holds on a lot of shots, and he makes a long sequence out of traveling. And in Solaris, we're have that perspective. We're following a car and going through the freeways of Tokyo, and it's a really long. It's a beautiful scene, but it's very long, and I feel sometimes viewers aren't used to that. Because when you see a movie,
strange.
When you see a movie,
viewers, of course, it's very
goes one
strange.
scene to the next, and Tarkovsky is like, "I'm going to show everything in between."
Yeah,
and he does. And
it has a point, but it's not easily seen. We don't appreciate that when we drive through a city, we get mesmerized.
And I like it. I love it. It was very memorizing.
I love it
especially
too.
For a sci-fi.
Something mesmerizing about it, especially with the Eduard Artyomov's electronic soundtrack, that accompanies it. It's very interesting. I mean, obviously, one thing if you talk about Solaris, that long drive, Tarkovsky was sent to Tokyo and he visited like the science expo where they had all the robots, and he wanted something to use for sci-fi film. Obviously, they didn't have much stuff like that in Russia, and also he was there to show his film Andrei Rublev to to the people in the festival, and he was there with his Russian cameras to film some shots of Tokyo because Tokyo is such a built up metropolitan area, and of course, an old European country like Russia doesn't have those scenes, and it just works very well. And of course, when we have like European characters drive through a city that's covered with like Japanese hieroglyphs, it kind of evokes the same feeling that we get when we watch a Blade Runner, where they have the same element, where it's like the
spectacle,
the combination
maybe.
of.
But Stalker does this, and instead of showing like wide shots, a lot of the times it's in close-ups, and we're staying on a character's faces for a long time. And I really love how, God, it's such a great sequence. Definitely hard to explain, but yeah, I just love how that's because we're with these two characters. And
I just want to say something. I hope it's okay. It's just we're sitting here in the room,
all right,
and the TV is on, and they just showed this man, a very important man in Tarkovsky's life, Mikhail Rom, who's an old Soviet film director from back in the days. Oh, Mikhail Rom, he's the guy who taught Tarkovsky when he went to the Institute of Cinematography in Moscow.
Oh, okay.
Why is that interesting? Because Mikhail Rom is a very talented filmmaker, but he's obviously not appreciated. And he's not appreciated because he was one of Stalin's most popular filmmakers because he made very, primitive propaganda films about Lenin, everything like that. So it's very interesting that a man like that, who made such primitive films, could, inspire. And Tarkovsky's like he was inspired by any other filmmaker, by his good teacher Mikhail Rom. Of course, Mikhail Rom, he gave the freedom, to his students, to be the filmmakers they wanted to be. Obviously, the old standard was like you have to do this and that, be a good filmmaker.
Follow the rules.
But Mikhail Rom, he was the first, probably the first film teacher in the world who, said that a filmmaker has to discover himself. He has to discover his own inner voice. And these words, for Tarkovsky, they became, his Bible. That's what he put, above his bed in his bedroom. That's
he did. Did he really put that?
Well, he didn't literally, but pretty much, that's kind of like what he
see.
did, and he followed, and he was very honest. Him and Mikhail Rom, they had a good relationship, and when Mikhail Rom released new films, Tarkovsky would say how awful they were, and how bad they were. He was pretty honest, and Mikhail Rom took it, and Mikhail Rom in exchange he said how wonderful Tarkovsky's films were. They were fresh and full of life. He only watched the first two, obviously, Ivan's Childhood and Andrei Rublev. But it's just interesting right now. It was kind of a coincidence that Tarkovsky's teacher was just on the TV screen as we're sitting in the room. Yeah. But I guess we can go back to Stalker now.
That's interesting. So this is not original story. This is a book adaptation.
Yes.
Right. Have you read the book?
I haven't, but I know the writers, the Strugatsky brothers, Boris and Arkady Strugatsky. They Arkady died in the 90s, and Boris just died actually, I think last year. And they wrote a bunch of sci-fi classics. The best sci-fi writers in Russia, probably in the Soviet Union and Russia.
Oh, okay. I'll have to get up on that.
Yes, and they wrote the novella. It's called Roadside Picnic, and that's what Stalker is based on. And of course, when Tarkovsky was interested in adapting the book, the novella, he asked them to write the screenplay. Actually, so it's the only film of Tarkovsky's that doesn't have him as a writer or co-writer. He's completely gone in the writer credits. He's just the director. Which, of course, is a little bit untrue because he did have a lot of input in the screenplay. But, that's off credits. So, yeah, the original writers, Strugatsky brothers, they wrote the screenplay for the film, taking into account Tarkovsky's style and everything. Of course, they didn't succeed exactly, so that's why Tarkovsky himself had to change a lot of things.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Huh.
That's how it was. Yeah, they're very popular writers. They're very famous, and I think their works are being really translated right now.
Yeah, I want to read some of it. Seems great.
They always have that mostly not so much. They're not like other writers that concentrate on like the details of like machinery per se, as much as like the evolution of society and like timeless you know humanitarian issues on the backdrop of the future or some kind of science fiction story, just like in Stalker.
All right. So let's kind of get into the analysis of Stalker. To me, when I first saw it, it seemed. I'm probably super off, but the way I saw it was kind of like when they were going to like the new area when everything was colored. It reminded me of like Genesis, as if they're in this beautiful place
Hmm.
that's almost like perfect to them, but they can't cope with the conditions. Did that seem like that to you, or am I way off?
Well, I mean, it seems that way. I mean, I think right now you're looking at the film like it's The Wizard of Oz, black and white Kansas, and then
Right.
colorful, magical land. It's
Yeah.
not magical, it's scary. We see ruins, we see rusty tanks, huge spider webs. Of course,
Right.
you never see the spiders, but, it's pretty uncomfortable. There's even the pool sequence, in black and white, by the way, but
Mm.
that's in the zone, this long strip of, like, artifacts of humanity, from religious icons to syringes to like weapons.
Yeah, it's creepy.
Um, yeah, so no, it's not supposed to be pleasant. The zone's more terrifying, if anything, than the town. Um, it's just because it's unusual. Uh, and again, because there's an important element in the zone is played by nature. So like green leaves, plants, the water. That's the primary reasons to shoot this in color. Um, Whereas the town doesn't have any of that. It's just old ruined concrete
Right.
buildings. Um,
What would your be take? What would your take? What would your take be on like an analysis of this film? If you're going to interpret it for yourself, what would you say it means?
well, I don't know. I mean, of course, most people say, and it's comfortable considering this is a Soviet film. It's like Escape from the Soviet Union because they have to really escape from their town to go into the zone, and the zone's something forbidden. That's like Western civilization, for example, Western Europe, America. Um, which has some, I mean, you kind of, read about like, West Germany, East Germany, and the East Germans trying to escape better life in the capitalist world. Um, but of course, I mean, the film, I think, I mean, I guess you can read it that way, but see, then it wouldn't be released. It'll be banned. Of course, the film came out in 1979. And that's because, again, it has these, timeless qualities about people searching for something better. Like
That's like every
the two main characters,
post-apocalyptic
they're
kind
all
of
searching.
story.
Like the scientist, he's a humanitarian. I think he might be a biologist. He wants, world peace. The artist, he's pretty selfish. He wants to be, the artist. He's a writer. He wants to be inspired. He wants to be a better
Yeah.
writer. And of course, the character of Stalker is a bit ambiguous because obviously he wants something too. I mean, I guess he enjoys the power of controlling people's lives. Well, actions as he takes them through this dangerous journey into the zone. So it seems. I mean, we're never seeing danger in the zone, but apparently, if you go into some directions, you can disappear forever, or
That's a scary
something
thought.
happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, or
I would
something
be
happens.
freaked out.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, because the zone, I mean, some people say, I mean, they said that in the movie, it's either a meteor or it's like something, not so much a meteor, but something left over by aliens. It's some kind of this force, and so they kind of read like radiation. They read this whole huge area that has this strange radiation. Not radiation as comic, but it's something unusual. So I mean, in a way, and this is kind of good for a Russian film because in Russian history, there's lots of exploitative elements like people say like uh, you can like mix these two grasses together and you make this potion that makes you live longer. There's things like that, and that's why it makes sense for Russian audiences. Like um, you go to the zone and dreams will come true. Nobody's dreams came true though. And of course, the Stalker, he has an argument for that. Like, it doesn't come true because by the time you get there, you don't have any dreams anymore. Because all you care about is just to survive.
Right.
And that's interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the room is just, it's so ugly. There's nothing there. And nothing could be there. It just doesn't seem right. It's like, it's someplace dangerous and forbidden. And we think if we go there, we'll have a better life.
All right. Well, we're going to discuss more about Andrei Tarkovsky's film Stalker after the break. Stay tuned. All right. We are back. This is KWDC 93.5, OP Stockton. This is Movie Talk, and we're discussing foreign films today, and specifically foreign film director Andrei Tarkovsky. And in the booth with me is
Pavel Koshukov.
And I'm Paul Besto. So previously we were discussing film Stalker, which was the film made, I guess you would say, in the middle of his career or later in his career.
Yeah.
And we just did a little analysis of it, what we thought about it. But now, would you recommend it to someone? If someone was to see Tarkovsky for the first time, would you recommend The Mirror or Stalker first?
It's hard to say. Stalker is a bit unusual for a sci-fi film because there's not much sci-fi to begin with, but that's the label it gets, unfortunately. That's how it got produced in the first place, with that label. If you make a sci-fi film in the Soviet Union, you get pretty much any freedom you want because people don't really care what you do, because sci-fi is not looked at as an interesting genre where you can, make anything dangerous or anything. That's why Solaris is such a good film. So of course I wouldn't, and for this reason, of course I wouldn't recommend Stalker, and I wouldn't recommend The Mirror as the first film of Tarkovsky's. Of course, for the first film of Tarkovsky's, I would recommend probably Ivan's Childhood, because of its length. It's a good film, but also because of its length. But after that, of course, Andrei Rublev is a good film, but probably Solaris, because even though it's a long film, it has a very much stronger emphasis on science fiction, and it's very mind-boggling, so I'm sure people might enjoy that, actually. And if you enjoy, Ivan's Childhood and Solaris, then chances are you'll enjoy all his other features as well.
Yeah, and I remember my first Tarkovsky film was Solaris, and then
same here, yeah.
And then I went to Ivan's Childhood, and then and The Mirror, and then I bought The Mirror and Stalker at the same time. So I was like, well, I'm gonna buy these movies. I hope they're good. They were good, so I'm happy for that. But I'm very familiar with those films, and not as familiar. Like, I've seen his last films, but I'm not as familiar with them. Can you tell us what his last films are and what they're about?
His last films? Well, that's pretty easy to say. After Stalker is his last film made in the Soviet Union, because after that he made a film in Italy, which was at the time, fairly easy to do because Italy and the Soviet Union had economic relationships. So many filmmakers were making, many famous Soviet filmmakers were making films in Italy, and Tarkovsky wanted to do one too. So he got online, he signed up, and they allowed him to go. He made a film called Nostalgia in '83. The thing with the Nostalgia, though, after he made it, he said he decided, I'm not going to come back to the Soviet Union. So he defected pretty much. And after that, he made his last film in Sweden called Sacrifice in 1986. Yeah. Of course, he moved to Paris first, but he made his last film in Sweden because of Ingmar Bergman's support. And Ingmar Bergman said, you can use all my crew.
Is that why? I didn't know that. Because I know he used Bergman's cinematographer.
Yeah, Sven Nykvist, yes. And I think there were other people, including actors like, what's his name? The actor, he recently died, that played in The Sacrifice, the main character. I can't remember, and the actress. But, even before, Nostalgia has pretty much the entire crew is Fellini's, including his director of photography. And, of course, with Sacrifice, that's, Ingmar Bergman's crew. So it's very interesting to see Tarkovsky work with other famous people.
Yeah.
Directors' crews, like Fellini and
artists
Bergman,
are working together,
and still make his own. Like, it's a Tarkovsky film, both of them, Nostalgia and The Sacrifice. But he used, the great talent of, Sven Nykvist, and I forgot the director of photography's name that did the most of Fellini's film, he worked on nostalgia.
Okay.
But yeah,
It's cool to see like artists help each other out and merge together and work on a project. See, Hollywood
artists.
filmmakers, Hollywood filmmakers kind of don't do that because they have the studio, limitations and kind of don't work together. So, some
Well, I can
directors
say
do.
something about that because there were limitations because Italy and Sweden, they're capitalist countries, and for Tarkovsky that was hard because he said, "I want to do this. I want to shoot these scenes this long. I want these many extras." And I said, "What the heck are you talking about? It's like this is the budget. This is the time you have to shoot the film. Gotta hurry up. And he's an art filmmaker. It's not a blockbuster that they're making. It's still low budget. He has to hurry up, film it. He can't afford that much extras. Everything costs money, where in Soviet Union it didn't. And for Tarkovsky, that was a real shocker, actually. Think about it, which is funny. Yeah, but another interesting story is when he was making The Sacrifice in '86. He went to Stockholm. The studio department. And he was in the same building with Ingmar Bergman. So Ingmar Bergman was in the building, and Andrei Tarkovsky, and both said nice things about each other. Without actually seeing each other. So now they're both of them are finding the building. Both of them were too shy to even see each
I
other
heard the
physically,
story. Yeah.
which is it's pretty funny, And of course, it was too late because Tarkovsky died later that year, just after he finished The Sacrifice. And Bergman felt very bad about it. He regretted that most of his life that he never met the director he said was the greatest director of our time. Yeah.
All right. Well, this concludes our segment of movie talk when we're talking about foreign films and classic films, and more about foreign films today, I would say. Tarkovsky, famous Russian filmmaker, artist, poet, every name in the book, I guess you could give him. He's an
Yes.
artist altogether as well as a filmmaker. Tune in next time for our next segment. This is KWDC 93.5. I am Paul Besto.
Pavel Koshukov.
And we are signing off. Thank you. And before we go, we just wanted to mention there's Delta Film Society, which will be starting next Thursday, August 27th, I believe. And in Film Society, we just discuss films, we collaborate with ideas, and we overall help each other out in our film endeavors. So, thank you, and we are out.